Pineapple should be on every pizza going forward. That's ridiculous. Pepperoni's the only topping that belongs on pizza. You don't know what you're talking about. Keep on yapping, man. Vote pineapples. What's happening, guys? My name's Nicholas Renaud, and in this video we're going to be calculating sentiment for the upcoming presidential debate using Twitter. Let's take a deeper look as to what we're going to be going through. So first up, what is sentiment analysis? Well, it's a natural language processing technique that allows us to classify text and speech as either positive or negative, subjective or objective. So in this case, when we go and calculate sentiment on our presidential debate, we're going to be able to see the polarity for each one of our candidates. So that polarity range will be from -1, which means it's a negative sentiment or a negative feeling, to 1, which means it's a positive feeling or a positive sentiment. We're also going to be able to calculate subjectivity, which ranges from 0 to 1, which basically tries to ascertain how objective or non-objective a particular statement is used. Now, we're using it for the presidential debate, but you could change the hashtag and repoint it to a completely different topic and perform sentiment analysis on that. Now, that being said, sentiment analysis is used in a whole wide range of fields, but most typically you see it used for market research, analyzing customer feedback, as well as financial stock and instrument analysis. For example, you might want to see the sentiment relating to Tesla or Apple or another big company. Now, let's take a look at what we're going to be covering today. So first up, we're going to be setting up our Twitter feed. So we're going to be able to pull down data from our Twitter feed using a particular hashtag, and specifically for that, we're going to be using the TweetPy Python library. Then we're going to be querying Twitter for the hashtag presidential debate. So we're actually going to be pulling back 1,000 tweets and analyzing the sentiment on that. And last but not least, we're going to be using a natural language toolkit as well as TextBlob to go and calculate our subjectivity as well as our polarity. So we'll actually be able to see sentiment for each one of our candidates. Which way will it go? Now let's take a look at how this is all going to work. So first up, we're going to be querying Twitter using the TweetPy library. So we're going to be using TweetPy cursors to pull down data. Then we're going to be pre-processing our data set using NLTK and calculating sentiment using TextBlob. And then last but not least, we're going to be visualizing all those results using Matplotlib. So you'll actually be able to see the rolling sentiment for each one of our candidates in real time from our Twitter feed. Ready to do it? Let's get to it. Alrighty, so in order to perform our presidential debate sentiment analysis, there's going to be 5 key steps that we need to go through. So first up, we need to authenticate to Twitter. Then we're going to grab some tweets, pre-process them using a little bit of natural language processing. Then we're going to be using TextBlob to calculate our sentiment, and from that we're going to be able to extract polarity and subjectivity. And then last but not least, we're going to be visualizing those results over time using a rolling moving average. Now, the first thing that we need to go ahead and do is authenticate to Twitter. So for this, we're going to need access to a Twitter developer account, but we'll come back to that in a second. Before we actually go on ahead and do that, let's actually go on ahead and import some dependencies. So there's going to be 4 key dependencies that we import in this step, and those are TweetPy, NumPy, Pandas, and Matplotlib. So let's go on ahead and do that. Okay, so those are our 4 key dependencies imported. So first up, we've imported TweetPy as TW, so that's this line here. Then we've gone ahead and imported NumPy, so import NumPy as NP. We've also imported Pandas, so import Pandas as PD. And then last but not least, we've imported Matplotlib with this line here. Now, the next thing that we actually need to go on ahead and do is grab some credentials from a Twitter developer account. So in order to get access to a Twitter developer account, you just need to go to developer.twitter.com. Then from here, once you've got an account, you just need to go on ahead and hit create an app, fill in all your details for your app. So in this case, you need your app name, app description, website URL, callback URLs, and a whole bunch of other good stuff. And then go right down to the bottom and hit create. And once you've got an app, you'll actually be able to go in, hit apps, and you'll have an app there. So in this case, we've got one called PyPost Curator, so we can just use those credentials. Now, if we jump back into our Jupyter Notebook for a sec, there's going to be 4 key credentials that we need to access. So let's create some variables for that, and then we'll take a look at what those are used for. Alrighty, so those are our 4 key variables set up, or prepared. So the first variable that we've got is our consumer key, then we've got a consumer secret, so these are going to be available through, again, our Twitter developer account, and then we've also got our access token and our access token secret. So all of these are going to be available through that app that we were taking a look at. So if we go back to our Twitter developer account and hit details for our app, and then select keys and tokens, you can see that we've got a whole bunch of good stuff there. So in this case, we've got some consumer API keys as well as our access token and access token secret. So we're just going to go on ahead and copy these into our Jupyter notebook. So if we grab our API key, this maps to our consumer key. And if we grab our API key secret, this maps to our consumer secret. And then for our access token and our access token secret, these are generated once. So once you see them, you got to copy them down and use them then and there. If you didn't copy them down, you just need to hit regenerate and hit regenerate again. And then you're going to be able to copy down the new credentials. So if we hit copy for our access token, this maps to our access token, and then our access token secret, that maps to our access token secret. And those are our 4 key credentials done. So that's going to be it in terms of working with our Twitter developer account. You can close that link down. You're not going to need it again. Now what we can actually go on ahead and do is authenticate Twitter using TweetPy and specifically the OAuth handler method. So let's go on ahead and do that. So that's our authentication done. So we've written three lines of code there. So the first one that we've written is we've accessed our Twitter or our TweetPy library, and specifically we've used the OAuth handler to create this auth object here. To that, we've passed through our consumer key, which we defined up there, as well as our consumer secret, which we defined up here. Then what we're doing is we're setting our access tokens on that auth object. So to that, we're passing through our access token from here and our access token secret from here. Then with that entire auth object, we're authenticating to the Twitter API. So this uses the tweetpy.api method or object, and then we're passing through our authenticator object, and we're also setting a keyword argument, so wait on rate limit. So this is all to do with the rate limit. And that basically means we're going to have fully authenticated access to the Twitter API via this API variable here. Now, the next thing that we need to go on ahead and do is actually set up our query. So for our particular query and for our presidential debate sentiment analysis, we're going to be using the hashtag presidential debate. So by using this hashtag, we're basically going to be able to go and search Twitter, pull back a set number of tweets so we can change them if we want to. And this is going to allow us to calculate sentiment on all the tweets that are related to that particular hashtag. For that, we're going to be using TweetPy, and specifically, we're going to be using the TweetPy cursor. So there's a whole bunch of documentation on how to use the TweetPy cursor, but that's fine. We're going to go through it now. So let's first up go on ahead and start setting up our tweet handler. Okay, before we write that last line of code, so we're going to basically be setting up a hashtag variable, and if you wanted to later on, you can go on ahead and change this hashtag. So if you wanted to perform sentiment analysis on another subject, all you need to do is go on ahead and change this hashtag here. So if you wanted to do it on another debate, or if you wanted to do it on a completely different topic, just change that. And that is going to change the query that's passed through to our search down here. So this is where we're using the tweetpy.cursor object, and through that we're passing through the api.search method, and we're also passing through our query. Now the last method that we're appending is the number of items that we want to return. So what this is basically saying is that we want to bring back 1,000 tweets. Now the last thing that we need to do is actually go on ahead and pre-process this result from our query cursor. And in order to do that, we just need to loop through each one of the results and append it into an array. This is going to make it a little bit easier when we want to work with it with pandas later on. So let's go on ahead and do that. So once we run that, it's going to take a little while to run, but you should be able to see all the tweets that you've just gone and collected. Now, a little bit more on this loop that we've sort of set up here. So what we're basically doing is we're looping through each tweet in our query. And remember, our query was what we set up using our tweet cursor. And then what we're doing is we're extracting our tweet.text and our tweet.created@, and storing those in two keys within a Python dictionary within a Python array. So basically what you're gonna have is a Python array, and then in that you're gonna have a whole bunch of these little tweet objects. And in each one of those tweet objects, you're gonna have the text, and you're also going to have the timestamp. And there you go. So we've gone and brought back our tweets, and you can see we've got a whole heap. Not all of them are all that nice, but that's fine. That's part of sentiment analysis. We're going to objectively analyze what are the results in there. But you can see we've now got tweets in there now. So if we wanted to, we can actually inspect those tweets. So if we wanted to take a look at the first one, you can see that we've got our tweet, which is actually the text, and we've also got the timestamp. So again, we've got a whole bunch in here. Perfect. So there should be about 1,000 tweets, because remember, we defined that we wanted to bring back 1,000 results up here. All right, we can get rid of that. Now, the next thing that we want to do is actually put this inside of a data frame to make it a little bit easier to work with. So because we're going to be performing some natural language processing, we want it in a data frame. It's just going to make our lives a whole heap easier when it comes to pre-processing. So we're going to be performing some stop word removal, some lemmatization, and having it in a pandas data frame is just going to make our lives a whole heap easier. So let's go on ahead and do that. And that is our set of tweets inside of a data frame. So in order to do that, we've just used pandas, we've accessed the data frame object, and then we've used the from_dict method and passed through our tweets. Then what we've gone and done is use the df.head method to show our first 5 rows. But if we wanted to, we can view our last 5 rows. And if we wanted to view more, we can just pass through the number of rows that we want to show as well. We can also check the shape of our data frame, and you can see that we've definitely got 1,000 tweets there. Now, the next thing that we want to do is we actually want to go and identify which candidate is being mentioned in each one of these tweets. So what we're going to do is we're going to set up a reference array, then loop through each one of these tweets, and if a particular candidate is mentioned, we're going to create a new flag or a new column within this data frame and raise a 1. So for example, if Donald Trump is mentioned within the Trump column, we're going to have a 1 within that column to represent that that particular tweet relates to Donald Trump. So this is going to allow us to independently calculate sentiment for each one of the tweets mentioning these candidates later on. So let's go on ahead and set up, first up, our reference arrays, and then we're going to loop through and create those columns. Okay, so those are our 2 reference arrays set up. So you can see that we've just got a couple of different examples of what we might see to indicate that it's mentioning a particular candidate. So for example, for Donald Trump, we've got Donald Trump, Donald space Trump, Donald Trump and Trumps, and we've got a similar set of values for Biden here. So this is basically going to allow us to loop through each one of our tweets and check whether or not one of these keywords are mentioned. And if they are, we're basically going to raise a flag and say that yes, it's potentially mentioning that candidate. Now let's take that next step and actually create those new columns with those flags so we can identify who's being mentioned in that tweet. All right, so that's our set of identifiers done. So you can see that what we've done is, first up, we've written a function called identify subject. And to that, we're passing through the tweet as well as our references that we've got here. Then what we basically do is we raise a flag. So initially the flag is going to be set to 0. And then we go and loop through each one of these references. And if it's mentioned in the tweet, we basically change the flag to 1 and then return that flag. Then when we actually go and call this function, we're using apply and specifically lambda on our df.tweets column. So that basically allows us to loop through each one of those tweets. and we're calling identify subject, or specifically the function that we just defined, on that particular value. Then we're passing through the tweet as well as our references here. And we've gone and done that for both Trump and for Biden. So basically in our data frame now, we should have two new columns, one called Trump and one called Biden, to represent whether or not a particular subject is being mentioned. So if we open up our data frame, you can see indeed we've got two new columns, and if we want to filter on either one of those, we can. And we can see all of the tweets where Trump is mentioned, so it's about 724. And if we take a look at Biden, it's about 159. So we've definitely got more results for Trump versus Biden. So if you wanted to potentially improve this, you might choose to separately pull out tweets for each one of the candidates. In this case, we're just going to roll with it and take a look at our final results. But you can definitely see that we've got our results and we've gone and identified who's being mentioned in each one of those tweets. So now the next thing that we actually need to go on ahead and do is pre-process each one of these tweets. So in order to do that, we're going to be using the natural language toolkit. So this is a really popular natural language processing library, and it comes with a whole heap of really good stuff whenever you're performing transformations on text. For example, it's got huge stop word dictionaries, which basically allows you to run through a whole bunch of words and remove stuff which might just be common language and isn't actually going to add any value to our particular NLP task. So in this case, what we're going to be doing is downloading the stop word libraries from this, and we're also going to be downloading the TextBlob object to allow us to perform sentiment analysis later on. So first up, let's go on ahead and import our dependencies here. Okay, so those are our dependencies imported. So you can see that we've first up imported NLTK, so this is our natural language toolkit. Then we've also imported stop words from NLTK.corpus, and we've also imported word and TextBlob from TextBlob. So this is going to help us with our sentiment analysis later on. Now what we're going to go in ahead and do is make sure that we download our stop words corpus. So sometimes you actually need to go in ahead and download this. So this is just a bit of a precursor to actually going in ahead and using it. So let's do that. Okay, so in this case, our NLTK corpuses are already up to date, but in this case, if you needed to download them, all you need to do is type in nltk.download and the corpus that you want. So what we've done is we've brought in stop words and WordNet as well, and then we've created our new stop words vocabulary by accessing stop words, .words, and specifically we're pulling through the English stop words library. Then we've also set up a second array, which is just called custom stop words. So these are things that we might want to remove from our tweets as well. So this is just adds another layer of processing. Now what we're going to go on ahead and do is create a pre-processing function that's going to go on ahead and clean each of our tweets. So let's go on ahead and do that, and then we'll take a look at the function. All right, so that's our pre-processing done. Now we wrote quite a fair bit of code there, so let's actually take it step by step and see what we went and did. So first up, we created a function called preprocess tweets, and to that we're passing through two arguments. So the actual tweet itself, because later on we're going to be using apply lambda to go on ahead and pre-process those tweets, and then we've passed through our custom stop words array, which is this up here. The first thing that we're doing is creating a new variable called preprocess tweet to handle our tweet. Then what we're doing is we're replacing a bunch of punctuation. So this is going to remove that and replace it with a blank value. Then what we're doing is we're performing our stop word removal. So these two lines here are basically just looping through each one of our words within our processed tweets. So by splitting it out, we're able to loop through each one of those words. And we're only returning our word if that word isn't found within our stop words corpus. So if it's not in the stop words, then we're going to return it. If it is in the stop words, then we're going to strip it out because it's probably a common word. So we're doing a similar line of things for both our stop words and our custom stop words. So we're only returning it if it's not in there. Then what we're doing is we're lemmatizing our words. So lemmatization is basically the process of taking a word and reducing it to its base form. So for example, say you had a word called debates, then you might reduce that to the word debate. So basically it's just taking a word and reducing it to its base format. Then our next line is basically just returning our tweet. And then we're actually taking our pre-processed tweets function and we're running it across all of our tweets using apply lambda. So you can see we're just passing through our function there. So pre-processed tweets, we're passing through each tweet as well as our custom stop words, which we need up here, and then we're just printing it out. So you can see finally we've got all of our tweets, and you can see retweet has been removed, presidential debate has been removed, you can't see it there. So that's gone ahead and done our pre-processing. Now the next thing that we're going to go on ahead and do is actually calculate our sentiment. So now we're up to the good bit. So we've done all that pre-processing and all that setup work. Now we can actually go on ahead and get to that good bit where we can calculate sentiment. So let's go on ahead and start doing that. So this is where TextBlob comes in. It's going to help us calculate sentiment, and specifically it's going to give us two values. So from our sentiment analysis, we're going to get polarity and we're also going to get subjectivity. So polarity measures how positive or negative something is. So it ranges from a -1 to 1. And subjectivity is basically how much that particular piece of text is based on emotion. So how objective or subjective it is. So that ranges from a score from 0 to 1. So in this case, we're going to go on ahead and through each one of our processed tweets or our pre-processed tweets, we're going to go on ahead and calculate sentiment on each one of those and store it within our data frame. So let's smash that out. And that is our sentiment calculator. So with just those two lines of code, we've basically gone and passed through our process tweet and we've converted our individual tweet. So because we're using apply lambda, we can grab each one and we're converting it to a TextBlob object. And then from TextBlob, we're extracting or using our sentiment attribute to extract sentiment. So from sentiment, you're going to get two things. So in our first value or our first part of our array, we're going to get our polarity, which is going to be stored in a column called polarity within our data frame. And the second value that we're going to get is subjectivity. So this is how subjective a particular tweet might be. Now, if we actually go on ahead and take a look at our data frame, you'll actually see those results now. So you can see we've now got polarity and we've also got subjectivity. So this allows us to do a whole bunch more analysis on what we've actually got on our hands. So say, for example, we wanted to calculate some aggregate statistics, we could as well. So let's go on ahead and try that out for now. And there you go. So we've now gone and calculated our aggregate sentiment statistics for each one of our candidates. So in our first table here, we're taking a look at our polarity and our subjectivity for Trump. And in our second table here, we're taking a look at our polarity and subjectivity for Biden. Now, if we actually go and interpret these results, keep in mind that these are based on Twitter and we did have a misbalanced data set. So we had more results for Trump than Biden. So just keep that in mind whenever you're analyzing these results. But if we go and take a look, what we're basically saying is that our mean polarity for Trump is -0.14, which means it's slightly negative. And then our mean subjectivity is 0.23, which means it's further to the more objective side than the more subjective side, which is pretty interesting given Twitter is quite a subjective platform and tweets tend to be your own opinion. For Biden in this particular case, we've got a mean polarity of -0.02. So this means it's a little bit better than Trump in this case from a sentiment perspective, and our subjectivity in this case, it's a little bit more subjective than Trump. So again, this is based on a misbalanced data set. So just keep that in mind whenever you're analyzing these results. So that's basically our sentiment analysis done. Big snaps there. Now, in this case, the next thing that we actually want to go and do is actually visualize our data set. So right now we're just taking a look at tables, but tables don't really do justice to what we've just gone and done. We actually want to go and visualize this based on time. So let's go on ahead and use matplotlib and start visualizing some of our results. So in order to visualize our results, what we're going to be doing is creating a rolling moving average for each one of our candidates. So basically, so again, keep in mind, this isn't going to be on the same time frame. It's a rolling moving average on the number of tweets that we've actually got available, and Trump had more tweets than Biden, or Trump had more references in tweets than Biden. But let's go on ahead and take a look at what this might look like. Oh, actually, I just realized we just completely skipped over through how we actually created this aggregate table. So what we actually did, so these two lines are pretty similar. The only difference is the first one is for Trump and we're grouping by Trump, but let's take a look at the code that we actually wrote there. So we're accessing our data frame, and this first part here is basically applying a filter on our data frame to return results where Biden or the Biden flag is set to 1. And then from that, we're returning through only a certain set of columns. So we're returning through the Biden column, so the flag column, polarity, and subjectivity. And then what we're doing is we're grouping by all of those results. And specifically, we're using the .ag method or .aggregate method to return back numpy mean, numpy max, numpy min, and numpy median. So this basically allows us to loop through our entire data frame, filter based on each candidate, and return these results that you can see down here. Now what we're going to be doing is creating our moving average data frames, and this is going to make it a little bit easier to go on ahead and visualize. So let's finish setting those up. Alrighty, so those are our two moving average data frames set up. So we've got one for Biden up here. This is the code that we've written, and we've also got one for Trump. So what we've basically gone and done in order to do this is we've filtered on our main data frame, which was just called DF, and we've checked our Biden flag. So in this case, we've checked that our Biden flag is set to 1, because that means that we've got a reference to that particular candidate. And then we're bringing back through our timestamp and our polarity. Then what we're doing is we're sorting these values, so by setting ascending to true, and then we're using the rolling pandas method to create a 10 tweet moving average. And we've also passed through an argument which basically says that we're going to only start calculating if we've got a minimum of 3 periods, which we know from the start that we did have. And then we're calculating the mean to get a mean moving average or mean rolling average. And we've basically gone and done a similar thing for our Trump data set as well. Cool, so if we take a look at our first couple of rows, you can see that we've got a mean polarity column here as well, and we can take a look at our Trump data set. And again, you can see we've got a mean polarity result there as well. Now, the last thing that we need to do is actually go and visualize these results. So this is the bit that we've all been waiting for. We want to see that graph. We want to see that sentiment over time. So let's go on ahead and do that. And there you go. So we've finally gone and calculated our two sets of presidential debate sentiment analysis. So in this case, our top graph or our top plot is showing our Biden 10 tweet moving average polarity, And our second plot is showing our Trump 10 tweet moving average polarity as well. So this is one candidate and this is our second candidate. Now, in order to do that, what we've gone and done is we've used the matplotlib subplots function to basically create two plots. And then our first plot here is basically plotting out our polarity from our Biden dataset, which had our moving average polarity. So we've used the plot function to go on ahead and plot that. So let's space that out a little bit so you can see it a bit better. So this particular block of code up here is basically plotting our timestamp versus our polarity, and then we're setting our title. And then our second line here is plotting again, but this time for our Trump dataset, our timestamp and our polarity, and we're setting the color to red to make it a little bit more obvious. And then we're setting our title or our subtitle, and then last but not least, we're putting up this presidential debate analysis title up here. So now you can actually see those final results. So overall, a couple of key things to note. So Biden looks like he's had a couple of swings. So he's swung between -2 to 2. So you can see that we've had some low points, but we've also ranged all the way up to some high points. In this case, Trump's obviously got a lot more tweets in this particular data set. So you're seeing a lot more fluctuation, but you're seeing it go down to a -4. So again, and it kind of sort of bounced around in the negative range. So just a couple of key things to note. Again, this is a Python tutorial, so keep in mind, this is by no means golden or perfect. And if you've got ways to improve it, by all means, let me know in the comments below. And again, keep in mind that we had more results or more tweets available for this data set for our Trump data set than we did for our Biden data set. So that's another key thing to keep in mind. But there you go. We've now gone and calculated our presidential debate sentiment analysis all the way through from Twitter down to visualizing it in Matplotlib. So we've done quite a fair bit. So we've authenticated to Twitter using our Twitter credentials and our Twitter developer account. We've grabbed our tweets. And again, keep in mind, if you wanted to use this for something else later on, all you need to do is change this hashtag here. We've got a whole bunch of pre-processing that we did with NLTK and TextBlob. So again, we lemmatized, we removed stop words, we removed punctuation. Then we used TextBlob to calculate our sentiment. And last but not least, we went and visualized it to get this lovely plot down here. And that about wraps it up. Thanks so much for tuning in, guys. Hopefully you found this video useful. If you did, be sure to give it a thumbs up, hit subscribe, and tick that bell so you get notified of when I release future videos. And let me know what you found during your sentiment analysis. Thanks again for tuning in. Peace.